participants.
Oh, sure. Okay, do you want to like? I don't know where that's from. Is it my laptop should be mute? Okay. I'm gonna be able to... It does sound like I can hear from my computer, so I don't know. That's great. Yeah, I can turn it on.
Hey, Monesh, can you just, if there's anyone else who's on there, can you just make sure they're muted, please?
Yep.
Thanks. Your battery's also
a little bit low. It should be okay though.
good. Very nice.
Yeah, in case my phone dies, I'll have this on the go. Gets posted. Okay, do you want to like? Yeah.
All right, we're gonna get started. If I can have everyone's attention, please. If I can have everyone's attention, please. I'm looking at you. Thank you. Welcome, welcome. Thank you everyone for coming out. It was great to see so many individuals here in person. My name is Andy, co-founder of TOHacks. My other co-founder, Shweta, is just over there. And we have a few other team members on the TOHacks team here as well. Thank you so much for helping out, coming out. But again, thank you so much for coming out. We have a wonderful, talented individual here who's going to do React for people in a hurry. I know nothing about React, so I'm going to definitely learn a lot of things from him. He's also an software engineering intern at Amazon. So if any questions about Amazon, would like to work there, please send him up. His Instagram is, I believe, Michael from YAG. Yeah. So definitely hit him up on Instagram. If you have any questions about UBC, he goes to UBC, so let him know. Other than that, again, my name is Andy, co-founder of TOHacks. If you want to talk about product, corgis, or anything travel related, feel free to be. Other than that,
I think you're muted, Michael.
There we go. Okay, I'm unmuted now. You guys should be able to hear me. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about React for people in a hurry. This could be a very brief workshop. I know there might be some folks in here who do know a bit of web development, some people who are like totally brand new to it. We did, if any of you went to the Waterloo series, have a sort of intro to basic web development, which was awesome. And so this will kind of build off the back of that. Today's workshop is going to be really light though. We're going to be talking at a high level what React is about. And yeah, without further ado. So welcome all. This is the most complex tech ever. Okay. So yeah, as mentioned, my name is Michael. I'm a third year honors computer science and minor in data science from UBC. So we all went. Anybody from UBC here? Didn't think so. People from Ontario schools? Lots of folks. Anybody from a non-Ontario school? Looks like literally no one. Okay, well, I'm alone. That's okay. West Coast, Best Coast. I'm currently a software engineer. Oh, your question? Yeah, Waterloo hands. Decent amount of Waterloo. Okay, okay. Couple of high school. Awesome. Love to see you guys out. That's sweet. So I'm a software engineer intern at Amazon right now, where I work on React stuff, hence the workshop. I used to work at Samsung, where I wrote a lot of backend stuff with Node and some startups. And I'm super excited to join you all for TOHacks. Okay. My keyboard is not connecting, so I think I might Okay, so that's my face when I was at Samsung. And then I'll show you my face again at Amazon. Sorry, tech is so awesome. It's the best industry real work. It just always works perfectly. So that's where I work right now in Toronto, which has been a lot of fun. I love being out here. So still not connecting, right? Awesome. Okay. Opening up. Okay, we're in. So today we're going to be talking about intermediate web development, which means we're going to step beyond the basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and hopefully step into your first framework. I want to ask right off the hop, anybody here written some React code before? Okay, decent number of hands. So you guys are going to hold me accountable. For you guys who are React pros, if I make any mistakes, you see anything you don't like, feel free to shout it out. I'm not afraid. Anybody here written HTML, CSS, JavaScript? Made a website before? Awesome. Looks like a ton of hands. So this should be a perfect stepping stone into something that can really up your web development game. I'm also going to focus on applications for the hackathon as well. I know you're all super excited to build something awesome this weekend, hopefully win some really cool prizes. So I'll focus on that. I'm also going to move pretty fast today. I'm going to try to talk slowly, but we're going to move through a lot of content pretty quickly. Try to keep things tight. And so this will be like a brief intro. You're going to get a sense of what's out there, why React is cool, why you might use it, and how it can speed up your web development. So yeah, one thing with web development is that the field as a whole just moves really, really quickly. As soon as you learn one thing, there's a new framework, there's a new library, there's a new whatever you feel like you have to master. So don't stress too much about trying to become a React expert or a whatever expert. Just be curious, and wherever your interests go, try to learn as you need to. That's the most effective way to get started. I know this can all be a little bit overwhelming. So what I expect from you all is you have a bit of familiarity with at least reading programs. It looks like we have a ton of people who've done some web development here, which is awesome. So the JavaScript, HTML stuff should look familiar. But I don't expect a ton more than that. And again, this is just an appetizer. Expect more of an entree from the react.js.org official documentation. They have a great tutorial there. This is just like what makes React exciting. We're going to talk about what is a React. What is this word I keep throwing around? What makes React tick? How do you use it? And then where do you go beyond React after today's workshop? So firstly, what's a React? So React is an open source framework, library thing. People debate which term you should use, made by Facebook, aka now Meta. React makes building websites responsive much, much, much easier. So if you guys have tried to make a calculator using just plain vanilla JavaScript, it's probably really painful, probably wanted to tear your hair out. So today we're going to look at that problem again and see how you can do it in much less lines of code, much easier. It enables logic to live alongside UI code. So instead of having your HTML page and then JavaScript in a separate file, you're going to see that our UI lives right beside the logic in our application, which is really handy for debugging and understanding your application. And it's used literally everywhere. So the reason I picked React today isn't because React is some magical thing. Mostly it's just because it's the industry standard at this point. Every single company uses it. I almost want to say like literally every company that has some kind of website, some team is using React. So it pays to know it, especially if you guys are trying to land your first co-op. We had some high school people here. That is awesome. So if you're trying to break into the industry, knowing React is a great skill set. Every company will be hiring it for it somewhere. React also has a great community around it. It's generally speaking easy to learn. You'll see today we can get a pretty good head start with not a ton of time. It's also super performant. People like to throw around the term blazingly fast. I don't know if React is blazingly fast, but it definitely is pretty good. And there's also great developer tools and an ecosystem around React. So you guys might have seen something called NPM, which is a package manager. With NPM alongside React, you can download like any component in the world. Someone has written it. On the NPM website, you can see all the different stuff people have shipped as packages, and you can probably import like entire applications. You'll see components later. There's really powerful libraries out there that makes getting going with React really, really fast. So that's the elevator pitch for React. That's why everyone's obsessed with it. It is a declarative. Yes, question, I'll take it. Yeah, so React Native is great too for being cross-platform. So how many people this weekend at TOHacks want to build a mobile app? Any interest there? A couple of ish hands, that's cool. So if you wanted to ship one code base for Android and iOS, you could use the same stuff we're learning today with React and write what's called React Native, and that's really cool. So you can do that as well. So React is declarative, which means it allows you to describe how you want the page to look, and the React will do all of the how. So you just write out where the components go and what order they go in, and it will determine how to get there. I keep throwing around this word component. I'll touch on it on the next slide, but we leverage a component style, which is really nice. And it also only updates what it needs to instead of refreshing the page. So what's really cool about React app is you can see we'll change state in the page, we'll change some information, And the page doesn't have to like refresh and reload everything, which is really slow. Everything just happens kind of in the browser really quickly, which is really cool. React allows you to break your application down into components, as I mentioned. This is a thing that helps to show rather than tell, so I'll do that in just a moment. But basically what a component is a fancy function. So how many people in here have used a function in computer science before? Should see basically every hand, right? Everybody in here has probably written some kind of function. Maybe it was in like Racket or Scheme if you go to Waterloo. Hopefully it was in Python, and you've seen functions return some data. So functions in React code should return some sort of UI element. You'll see they return what's called a React fragment. And that is it looks like HTML. It's not technically HTML, but that's the UI code that we'll actually see on the page. But aside from that, they're really just a function. So this is the Amazon.ca website. Obviously, I'm a bit biased. I work in Amazon. So on this page, you can see a bunch of what could be components. I have no idea what the Amazon.ca homepage is written in, to be totally honest. But if it used React, all of these chunks, I'm going to walk over for the people on video. These white squares all have some common themes. I know the projector is pretty hard to read, but there's a title here, there's some kind of header image, and then there's a link below each of these. And so that common UI structure can be put into a component, and then we can feed in arguments, right? So a bunch of you guys have written a function before. You know that functions take in arguments or parameters, just like math, basically, f of x kind of thing. And these arguments can be used to use the same UI structure repeatedly, so you don't have to copy and paste HTML all over your code base. Because you can imagine what it would be like if Amazon just hired thousands of engineers and we all just manually tweaked the HTML to get it exactly right. And then when a product was delisted, a new product was added, we just went in and added more HTML. It'd be ridiculous, right? Obviously, that's not how things work. And so React as a UI library allows us to reuse some of that structure. Here's another example, Very Hungry Caterpillar, excellent read, much recommend. And you can see, like, for example, this component on the right-hand side that is for buying the actual product, you can reuse all across the website, right? Say you wanted this checkout screen here on a product page, but maybe you also want it on the homepage. So users can also buy in one click right from the homepage or wherever else. You can reuse this without having to copy and paste it. And you all know that code duplication is very bad. So if you edit things in multiple spots, it's very hard and things get nasty really quick. So what makes React tick? This is the next topic I want to dive into. It feels very cool when you download React and you run your first React application, but it also is pretty mind-blowing how it works. And for those of you who have done some React before, hopefully this will be a good either refresher or you'll learn something new for the first time. So firstly, I have to talk about how websites work. And I feel pretty bad here because I'm gonna have to gloss over a whole ton of detail because we're trying to go in a hurry. But HTML is translated into a kind of data structure called the DOM, which is the document object model. And that content is what's used to actually render the browser. And so what React does is it takes not exactly HTML, but kind of HTML and builds a virtual DOM. So instead of going directly to the DOM, it builds a virtual DOM. And this is basically like one huge object. And instead of having to update the DOM every time you want to reload a component or go to a new page, it just refreshes the virtual DOM and only changes exactly what it needs to. So this makes React really fast. All right. So instead of having your traditional JavaScript website where you go in and if you've ever written some JavaScript or even jQuery code, you might have done like document.getElement by ID, document.getElement by class name, so on and so on. Instead of doing all of that, now it's just really performative in the virtual DOM. You don't have to access the DOM directly. Okay. I know I'm glossing over a lot of stuff, so if your mind's a little bit blown, don't worry too much. The inner workings of React aren't super critical for getting started. So components, as mentioned, can take arguments, but they're not allowed to modify these arguments as well. So if we want to modify some kind of state, that has to be internal to a component. And then once they're either props, their properties or arguments are updated, or their state updates, then they re-render, which is really cool. And we'll see that when we talk in our like calculator-ish example. We can write normal JavaScript functions within our React components as well, and then use this to handle various events. So like a mouse click or what have you, can all be just normal vanilla JavaScript, basically, that you're used to. And this can live right inside your React component, which is really cool. All right. So I've mentioned a few times, there's this like ish HTML, but not thing that you use to write React code. It's called JSX. And what it allows is for you to write something that looks a lot like HTML as the actual UI stuff that your component returns. And we'll see a good example of this. But then you can also write JavaScript for the internal logic of your component and then export it all and import it elsewhere and render your whole application. So JSX is actually built on top of JavaScript. It's really, really cool, and it's probably my favorite part of React. It makes things really, really nice. It's not technically needed. You can do all of the React stuff with vanilla JavaScript too, which is pretty crazy. And if you're curious how that works, I recommend going and checking out the official React tutorial. So here's a bit of JSX to put everything into practice, right? You're like, where's the code? Where's the code? Here's some code. So this is our first component. You can see, as I mentioned, that it's just a function. It's called welcome. Typically, we capitalize the first letter of components, and we write it using like capital camel case. And then you can see it takes props, just arguments. Now, usually they just take one argument. Instead of having a list of A, B, and C it takes in, we put everything inside a props object. And here we pass in down with the element this name argument. The name here is Sarah, just an example I found online. And so this, when rendered, would render an H1 tag, like you're used to if you've seen any HTML before. And it would say, hello, comma, Sarah, and render the component, which is pretty cool. And you could run this right in the browser. You need to import React, of course, and it would just work, which is pretty cool. So that ugly stuff on the bottom with React DOM, create root, blah, 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 that's how it actually happens under the hood. We don't usually look at that when we're writing React code. Last thing I have to mention, I'm blowing by a lot of React content really fast. Don't worry if it's going a bit quick. It's always recorded, and you can check it out online. But I also want to talk about the React component lifecycle. So in your life, you also have a lifecycle. At some point you were born, I hope. Maybe you'll get a house, probably not in this economy, but maybe you'll just rent in the Bay Area forever. And then eventually you'll die, unless you're immortal, which is cool. Components also have a life cycle. So they're constructed, which initializes their state. Then their render method is called. Makes sense, just like a normal object. If you've ever done like an OOP class or something, same kind of thing. They call the render method on the object. It's mounted. I'm not going to get into what that means. And then at some point, it may like re-render on the page. So the status updates and it calls render again, and so on and so on. And then eventually when it's destroyed, dies, what have you, it unmounts from the page. It just means basically leaving the virtual DOM. This allows us to build dynamic components and enables asynchronous behavior. So at some point in the lifecycle, we can do certain actions. So for example, when my button component is mounted on the page, so it's now inside the DOM, that's the point at which I want to make an API call, right? Don't know what an API call is, don't be too scared. Say I want to go fetch some data from a database, right? Then I could render that inside of my component and it would show on the page, which would be sweet, in a table or a graph or what have you. So we use a lifecycle and insert logic at different points to make our component behave how we want to. Kind of make sense? Cool. So circle of life, thought I had to give a nod. And then lastly, hooks. So this is newer in React, I think in React 16. We moved away from, it used to be fully just classes were components. Now there's functional components, which is really nice. And then hooks were added as a part of that. Hooks encapsulate a bunch of logic. You can think of them as just like really useful functions that you'd reuse across your React app. Now, note, these functions don't return like JSX, some like thing to render on the page. They're just strictly logic. And there's some built-in hooks that are really, really helpful for like working with our React app. For example, as we'll talk about in today's workshop, there's something called useState, which allows us to preserve state across re-renders. And then there's useEffect for handling side effects in our React code. And there's a lot more that you can read about. Some of them I still don't really understand, to be honest. But the built-in hooks are really powerful, and you can even write your own. So for those of you who are React pros, you can make your React code a lot better by pulling out custom hooks across your application and then reusing that logic in different parts, which is really cool. All right, so this is a first kind of React demo. This is where I'm going to start actually doing some coding. It's going to be a little bit awkward with this like long distance thing, but we'll figure it out. This is a code that looks like it might work, but actually doesn't. So here we have function app. So it's just a one component app, very simple. It returns a button that on the click calls this function called handle click. And then in that span, it's going to render whatever the count variable is. Now, for those of you who've done some React before, can anybody tell me why this would not work? The idea is that I'd click the button and then count would increment. And so I could click, 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 and it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And I'd have my first ever React app. Very cool. I go put React to my resume and so that I know it, and that kind of thing. So why wouldn't this work? It is pretty tough, I will say. Or if anybody on Zoom as well, if you want to type it in the chat or unmute. There's one thing that if you've done some React before, you'll notice is missing. Like it just makes you feel gross, which is that I have imported useState at the top, but I don't even use it, right? I just do like let count equals 0. So in class, you might have learned about scope, right, with variables. So in a function, variables are scoped to the call. So count here lives within function app. So every time that the component re-renders, count is going to be overwritten. Let count is going to be back to 0. So if I click the plus button, it'll say count equals count plus 1. It'll re-trigger the render, and then count is going to be overwritten. It's going to be set back down to 0, which sucks. That's not what we wanted. So what we have to do instead is use a hook, and that allows us to persist state across renders. Okay, so if I use this very arcane looking syntax where I say const count comma set count, so I'm pulling out both the variable count and a function that allows me to update count's value from return from use state, then I could call in my handle click method set count equals count plus 1, and that will work as expected. And we'll see that in just a moment. We'll take this kind of little example and we'll extend it a bit. So that's React in a nutshell. Again, I know we blew by it, but what's more interesting to you all is how to use it, right? We're here for a hackathon, and it's great to understand how things work, and I encourage you to go poke. I'll share some resources later. But really what we want to do is like get coding. We want to make a website. We want to win some prizes. So I am going to hopefully leave this, and this is the most awkward way I've ever programmed in my life, I think. Also, it's going to be really hard to read because that projection stinks. But we will try our best. I think I'm going to do it at my laptop, at least so I can read it, and I'll try to make it as big as I can for you all. But we're going to walk through just first have a React app. So this is what we're going to try to build. Basically, it's 3 buttons that all will count by different amounts. What you notice is that there's a lot of common logic, like all of +1 and +2 and +5 are all adding to the same thing. So hopefully we can reuse this and not have to copy and paste copy. That'd be really nice. So what we're going to start with, I will pop over to, is just a single counter. This is what I was showing in the slide from before. It will load up in just a moment. And all this React tooling is really powerful. I'll show you with like one command, you can get almost to this big counter. So right now we have a simple counter, and it was just as I showed here. All right. So this, let's see how that looks. Wow, that is rough. How many people can read it? Like how many rows at all? Can't. Yeah, I figured. Okay. What I might do, I don't want to make you guys have to just kind of like dish a lot. I can see that. Is I'll like post this in the workshop slide that's there. The good exercise here, moving from just a single like button that increments to multiple, is really good for getting a hands-on understanding. But I will leave that as kind of an exercise for the reader, as I professors do. And then we'll just come back to this slide. I can just kind of a little bit more. That's okay. Yeah. Okay, so instead of the demo, let's talk about where do we go. So you just I just blew your minds and told you what this React thing is and showed you a little bit about it. But where do we go from here? We've just barely scratched the surface, to be honest. Talked about one hook and at a very high level, and there's a lot to know, but it's really exciting. It's really, really powerful what you can do with not a ton of code, which is really cool. Some tools I want to shout out for when you get started this weekend at TOHacks, hopefully making a React app. Firstly is Create React App. So this is a project made by the maintainers, and it allows you with like literally one command in the console to get all the boilerplate out of the way. And there's also like, set like starter things you can use online. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Just go to Create React App, run the command, boom, you have your React app. It's a nice like hello world thing. I wish more languages had it. So that's great. You can start up your React app in no time. Yeah, no, you actually don't even have to install it. If you have npm React app, Create React App is a command you can run through npm. It's pretty cool. There are a ton of UI libraries out there that allow you to make an app. So instead of having to write like components from scratch, you can use built-in UI components, which is really nice. So Material UI is a great example. There's also one called React Bootstrap, which if you've done some CSS, you might know what Bootstrap is, and it's just ported over to React basically. That'll allow you to make a really pretty app, blow the judge's mind in not a ton of time. And if you guys are a little bit more advanced, you can really start to up your React game by learning how Webpack works, using ESLint and Prettier to make your code a lot easier to read, and then Sass and Tailwind for writing better CSS. So there's a lot of tools out there you can add on to make your React even better. There's also a few basic skills that I can't cover here, but you should Google, and there's a ton of great resources online for how to do. In no particular order, I'd learn how to make an API call. If you find some buddies this weekend who know a bit of backend, you can network here tonight and say, hey, do you know some Node? Or hey, do you know some Golang or what have you? Can you write an API? I can do the React side because I just had this awesome workshop. And then you have to know how to make an API call. You can build like literally almost any hackathon project with two pieces, a React front end and whatever your friend chooses to write as the back end, but you have to know how to call his API. Otherwise, you're gonna have a very painful debugging session at 3 in the morning. You should also know how to create a form. There's a ton, like Formic and Yup, which aren't on the slide, I should have put them in there, is a really awesome library for creating forms. And it's super common if you want a login thing, a sign up thing, entering any data, you're gonna need a form. So look that up and use it. And then creating multiple pages. So you notice that you went to the home page of the app I just kind of threw on the screen, but you couldn't navigate to the about page or you don't have multiple index HTML files like we're all used to. And there is a way to do that. One way is with something called Next.js, which is a thing around React again. There's kind of more layers to it. And that allows you really easily to make React different like pages in your React app. And there's also like NPM packages that can do it like React Router. I'm on 3% battery on my phone. That's fun. And then find some friends who are willing to do backend, as I mentioned, have them build an API, and then you can make a sweet front end. Project ideas get you started. So if you can't find anybody who will write an API for you, that's very sad. It's okay. Not out of hope. You can also visualize open data sets, and often they do have public APIs that are free. You can also just Google like GitHub public APIs. You can find a ton of stuff that will spin off a ton of different really cool hackathon ideas. And visualizing data is always a great project. You can do really interactive and cool things with it. It's nice, like really a thing that judges can grasp. So I highly recommend. Spotify has a really cool web SDK, and there's a lot of like already pre-existing React components that you can just import into your app and work with Spotify. Like you can show the song that you're listening to right now on your phone. And like one of the first hackathon projects I built was like highlighting the rhyme schemes in songs using like a lyrics API. So there's a ton of cool stuff you can do, and we didn't have to write any backend code for that, which is sweet. No database, none of that, which is always the hard, gross part. And then productivity hacks. So building a to-do list is a great beginner project. It's a little bit dry though, so try to put your own twist on it if you do choose to go down that route. There are tools you can use around React. I mentioned Next, Gatsby, Remix. Remix is really new. They exist. There are also other frameworks entirely, right? The front-end space is just huge. So there's Vue, which is really cool, and Svelte instead, which is gaining a lot of popularity. And then while you're learning, don't be afraid to try new things. I said it right at the beginning, front end is a wild, wild west, basically. There's always new frameworks, new technologies. So don't worry about mastery. Focus on what can help you build something quickly, what works well. And if you don't like it anymore, throw it away. There's always a new thing you can try. That's all, folks. I think I wanted to mention a few further resources. So a couple of my friends from UBC / I think it was Waterloo ran a really good workshop on React, but it took an hour, so I couldn't show it, at Hack the North. Hack the North also is awesome. I presented there last year too. So if you want to learn about data science, you can go look at my old workshop. The official reactjs.org website is bar none the best resource. Don't get stuck in YouTube tutorial hell like everybody else. Just go to the React official website, follow theirs. It's awesome. You make tic-tac-toe. It's really good. And then you all are students, I assume. And so you can go get the GitHub student education pack thing. Google that. And then you get 6 months to front-end masters for free. And front-end masters is dope. That takes way more time. But if you can do Complete Intro to React by Brian Holt, who works at Stripe, you will be a coding god, and you can work anywhere and you'll know so much React. So do that. And then there's even an intermediate one if you're really keen. Questions? You saw a couple hands. I'll take those in a sec. Feel free to reach out on anything at Michael from YEG, that's Edmonton, on all the things. Also, you might have seen, I can tell you how to make your editor pretty and your terminal pretty. I like doing that. Good luck this weekend. Don't hesitate to reach out on Discord if you're stuck, and best of luck on your projects. That's all for me. Yes. Yeah, no, it was really cool. We did like some, I think it was like a MF Doom song, rest in peace. And that was really cool. I saw another hand. Yeah, literally everything rhymed. Hand in the back, another question? No, I assume not. Okay, well, yes, yeah. Yes. Yes, okay, yeah. Okay, cool question. So somebody asked a lot, this is, when I started with development, I didn't really understand this. So a lot of times when you make your first projects, you write like templated HTML. A lot of you maybe have seen this before in tutorials. Django is one that you do this. You can do it with like Flask, where your backend like serves your HTML, right? So you have your like server, and it will take some client input, and it will do some logic probably, and then we'll fill in the HTML and then send that HTML to the page. React is not like that. That's server-side rendering. You can do that with React, and Next.js supports it, and other frameworks do. But really, what I would recommend is doing client-side rendering. So it really is nice because it allows you to work independently of the backend. So your front end just calls the API, takes the data, and then in your use effect hook, that's where you would do some internal logic and then render the page. This is kind of the beauty of React, this client-side rendering thing. And then the API is totally distinct. You could swap out the API. They're like totally decoupled from each other. One can go, one can stay, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, a lot of you are probably like used to the whole like HTML is filled in by the server and that's just sent to the front end and that's how apps work. But you can also do them completely distinct from each other. And this is a lot of companies are moving in this direction. Client-side rendering is really good for certain use cases. And then you can have multiple services being called. You can do all that microservices, mumbo jumbo. So that's a really cool way of doing things. So if you get confused by that, it's a super good question. React is distinct from Django or other projects you might have used before. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you have a lovely networking session. I'll be around for a bit. I have to head out a little bit early, but it was nice being here. Thank you all.
So, like Michael mentioned, the rest of the night here is just networking. We'll be here until 8 o'clock. Please feel free to continue helping yourselves with some food and some drink. I know that we are low on some veggie options, so there's more pizza along the way. But if any questions on the hackathon, please feel free to reach out to myself or any member of the organization. Thanks.
Yeah, I've used it like once in my life. I usually use Flask. Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah.